Hi everyone, it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. Welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today we are wrapping up the month of January with the 4 books that I managed to read in the chaos that was that month. So if you have seen my previous video, you will know that during January, 2 weeks of January, I was down the coast with my family, and this year we had 3 little babies with us, which obviously took a lot of our focus, and it was a really lovely time sort of spending time with the babies, you know, long periods of time with the babies where usually we only get to spend like a couple of hours if we're at an event together and that sort of thing. So it was really lovely, but it did result in me not reading as much as I normally would in January. So normally while I'm down the coast, I get quite a bit of reading done, and I might, you know, by the end of the month have read something in the vicinity of 6 or 7 books. This month we just read 4, but 4 is my aim for each month. So I met my goal of being able to read, you know, basically a book a week. So I'm really happy with that. And also the other thing that's great about it is that the lowest rating of any of the books that I read this month was 4 stars. So that's a pretty good month in my opinion. So let's get into the books. I started the year off by reading this poetry collection called Happiness by Martin Harrison. This is a book that I picked up. I was buying a specific book from the publisher, and the publisher is UWAP, which is the University of Western Australia Press Publishing, and because I was having to pay, when you buy books directly from the publisher, you know, they're not like one of the big sellers that's going to have free shipping if you get over a certain amount. They just have like a flat rate of shipping. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to have a look in their sales section and see what's there. And this was a book that I picked up as part of that. So this is not a poet that I had heard of before, but I was like, you know what, the premise of the collection sounds good. You know, I'm keen to give it a go. So I did. I picked this book up and I gave it a go, and I really, really loved it. And I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. So basically Martin Harrison died in 2014. So he's no longer with us. But this was his final manuscript. So he had prepared and delivered the final manuscript. And this is, a lot of these poems are nature focused. A lot of them are, you know, sort of focused on, you know, his lover, you know, and things like that. So it was a very sort of kind of grounded poetry collection in a way, and I really, really enjoyed a lot of the poems within. So there were a couple in there that kind of pulled me out of the moment, and the reason was, you're going to laugh at me for this. Okay. The reason was he used a word for male genitalia. And I just don't think there's any single word for male genitalia that is actually poetic. So to me, it was quite like, you know, it just wasn't for me. So that was why it's 4.5 stars rather than 5 stars. But his poems that were about nature were absolutely lovely. It was sort of the kind of poetic situation where the words kind of just wash over you, which is what I really like in my poetry. I really like when words wash over me, and maybe I don't understand everything that's in the poem, but it's one of those things that you can then go back to, and maybe you'll understand it differently or have a different experience with reading it the second time. So I would recommend this poetry collection if you're okay with the occasional use of a word for male genitalia that's not going to sound poetic. It's not going to sound lovely. Yeah, otherwise, this is amazing. And I was really pleased that this was my first book of 2025. Then I read a book by accident, and it was this one. called Rockstar Detectives by Adam Hills. So I picked this up while I was away secondhand shopping on my trip home. So I popped in, so it wouldn't have been in my my haul from my holidays because I filmed that while I was still on the coast, and I picked this up on the way home from the coast. So this is a book I picked up not for me. I picked it up for my sister's child who is getting into reading, and I was just intrigued because Adam Hills, the comedian, the Australian comedian who now is based in the UK and hosts stuff over there, he had written this book and I hadn't heard anything about it. And so I just kind of got a little bit curious as I was sort of taking the stickers off and preparing to put this book into the bag of things that I put aside. I was like, I'm just gonna have a little flick through, and I started reading it, and then I kept reading it, and over the course of 2 reading sessions, I read the whole book. Because it's great. It was really fun. I really, really loved it. So basically the premise of this is we have 2 children. So this is a middle grade book. So we've got Charlie, who is 12 years old and is an international singing sensation. And then we have George, who is her best friend. And George is a disabled character without his disability being like at the forefront. Like it's there, and disability rep is definitely a massive sort of like green flag for this book. It's great that we have a disabled character, and there are a couple of moments where his disability is kind of comes to the fore and is, you know, something that's talked about, but it's not. He's not just there to be the disabled best friend. He's a main character in this story. So we've got 2 main characters, and they're both great kids, and believable kids, I felt, for the most part, which is a big tick for me, a big, you know, yes please, because I just can't stand when a child character doesn't feel authentic in a book, but they definitely feel authentic. They feel like kids. They don't just feel like adults disguised as kids. So basically, Charlie is a singer. George does her videos. And so they're sort of like a pair, and they kind of bring out the creativity and courage in each other in their art, basically. And Charlie has kind of made it big via social media, because she's wasn't signed to a label, and she's become like a big pop sensation, basically. And so they are on a world tour together, and then some works of art start going missing in the same cities that Charlie is performing in, and then it turns out that they end up being the prime suspects because it was a piece of art that they'd spent some time with. They'd posted on social media about, and so the police are like, seems a bit sus that this piece of art that you said want on social media for has now just gone missing. And then, you know, they sort of are able to kind of talk their way out of it because they are not the culprits. They are not the people stealing the art. And then in the next city that they're in, the same thing happens. So they end up being like the prime suspects of, you know, this art theft kind of conspiracy. So there are some elements of this that are like not super believable, you know, in the way that the police interact with the children. I felt like that bit of it was probably a bit less believable as an adult, but if I were a kid, it would pass me by completely, and I would, you know, the other elements of the story that are excellent would definitely be plenty. So I gave this one 4.5 stars. I really wanted to know who did it, and I was surprised at the ending. And the like motives of the person who it ended up being. So that was good. Like the mystery element of it was good, and the, you know, the characters were great. The storyline was compelling. I wanted to know how it resolved. So yeah, this was great. I loved it. So yeah, I was really happy to have accidentally finished this book second, because it was an excellent read. The third book was a bit more of a slow burn, in the fact that I started it last August and I've sort of picked it up, put it down, picked it up, put it down. And the reason for that was, sorry, I should say what it is first. It's Black Duck by Bruce Pascoe with Lynn Harwood. So this is a book, so Bruce Pascoe wrote a book called Dark Emu that I read several years ago now, which was sort of pulling back the curtain on our beliefs about Aboriginal Australians, so the Aboriginal people of the country in which I live, and the ideas that we have about them as being nomadic and, you know, not invested in the land in the way that we would imagine people being invested in land, like, you know, in terms of farming and, you know, technology and, you know, the ways in which people might use the land. And Bruce Pascoe just highlights evidence that is available to show that that's not the case. So that's in Dark Emu. So this is a follow-up to this. So Black Duck is the name of his farm / kind of like corporation, I guess, like his business, where he employs Aboriginal people and they are farming native grains, basically, because there's evidence, for example, that is shown in his previous book, that the oldest grinding stone that has ever been found in the whole world was found here in Australia. So that's evidence that people were grinding grain, native grain, to make breads and other, you know, bready type products. So, you know, basically his vision is that we could have native grains, so we know that they're not going to these crops are not going to be destructive in our environment. They don't require the same levels of special care that imported grains like wheat, for example, would require, because these are native plants, so they're designed for the conditions here in Australia. So he believes that we could transform our culinary kind of system and our ideas and the kinds of things that are normal for us. And, you know, it also is an opportunity to, you know, actually connect with the land that we live on, and to connect with ancient wisdom and ancient techniques. Yeah, so anyway, that's his vision, and this is sort of like, I guess, the prototype, really, that he wants to show it's possible. So this is a memoir. Black Duck is a memoir of a year on the farm. So he talks about all of the things that happen, and man, he's a busy man. So not only is he managing this property and living on this property that's quite in a rural area, he's also like constantly flying or driving out to different locations, universities, writers' festivals, etc., speaking engagements, as well as like Aboriginal ceremonies and, you know, things like that. And he is going to speak or participate in these things, and it's happening like all the time. He's a busy man. So yeah, he talks a lot about that and the sort of the difficulties that he faces, as well as like the triumphs and the, you know, things that are going really well. And he kind of reflects on a lot of things, you know, to do with land management and to do with where, you know, Western ideas of land management have gone wrong in Australia because they're not suited to the conditions in Australia. So yeah, this was a really interesting read. So I know it took me a long time. The reason it took me a long time, coming back to that idea that I flagged at the beginning of talking about this book, what it was that I started listening to it on the audiobook. It's read by him, and for me as a listener, it wasn't working as an audiobook. So my preference was reading it on paper. So once I picked up the paper book, also there's a lot of photographs and things in here as well. which you obviously miss if you're listening to the audiobook. But, you know, I much preferred reading this on paper. And once I did that, things started to kind of move along, and I was able to get this finished in the month of January. So it took me a few months. But yeah, it was an issue with the format in which I was reading it, not an issue with the book. I gave this 4 stars. It was an excellent read, and I highly recommend it, especially if you've read Dark Emu. This is sort of like the practical application of the knowledge that is presented in Dark Emu. So this is a really great companion to that book in terms of like a vision of what could happen, how things could be. So yeah, highly recommend that one as well. The last book that I read, and you will notice as well, by the way, Australian author, Australian author, Australian author. My last book is also by an Australian author, so this was a very Australian reading month for me. And this is one, actually, I need to do a slight censorship here, because let me just confirm that there's nothing else inappropriate for the screen on the front cover of this book. Yes, so I've just covered up some boobs. So this is Eventually Everything Connects, 8 Essays on Uncertainty by Sarah Firth. Now I can't remember who I heard speaking about this. I did hear about it on TikTok, and somebody had not read the book, but they were just excited to read it. So they were recommending it from the perspective of excitement to read. So it wasn't necessarily a recommendation because they had read it. So therefore I was going into this blind. I didn't really know what to expect. All I had heard was that the author is neurodivergent. And so it's an own voices book from a neurodivergent perspective, and I'm all about that. So I was very happy to pick this up. So I bought it and I read it and I loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. This book was excellent, and I wanted to take a little bit of time reading it, so I tried to kind of limit myself to reading 1 essay a day. In the end, I ended up on the last day maybe reading 2 or 3 essays in one day, rather than just 1, mainly because I wanted to get it done, but also because I just wanted to keep reading, so I kind of spread them out through the day. And the reason for that is I wanted to give myself time to think about what had been presented in the essay. So basically, Sarah Firth is a neurodivergent Australian author. This is a debut for her. She's also the illustrator, so she does the pictures and the words. And I really loved her reflections on things. So they're quite diverse. They're about different topics. Let me just pull open the contents. So even just the titles of the different essays kind of give a reflection of like the differences between what the contents were. So there's one about joy, like finding joy, like a moth to a flame. I actually can't recall what that one was about. Let me just have a quick reminder. Oh yeah, so that one was about like social media connection and the ways that we kind of like end up getting sucked into the basically doom scrolling and continuing to like consume content about things that are like horrible things that are going on in the world, and like how that affects our mental health, and also like the ways in which we connect to other people. The next one was called Desire Lines, and that was about desire, about sexual desire. And it goes on. They're all quite different topics, but they're about like connecting ideas. And I would say as well, being a neurodivergent author, the ways in which she connected, and if you're a neurodivergent person like me, you will be familiar potentially with those kind of like big idea, big picture, little picture kind of ways that neurodivergent minds can connect ideas. And this absolutely represented that sort of like the ways in which a neurodivergent person might be thinking about such topics, and thinking about, you know, these kind of like big ideas, but also like how in her own life these things kind of manifest, and also like, so it's that big picture ideas, but like then that kind of local connection to those things, which I guess the title of the book is kind of alluding to. Eventually everything connects. So yeah, this was amazing. If you're a neurodivergent person, I would highly recommend it. Even if you're not a neurodivergent person, I thought this was a great collection of essays that would really make you think. And also, we should be listening to neurodivergent people because we're good thinkers. We're the kinds of people who think very deeply about things in many circumstances. That's a lot of people's way, the way in which their neurodivergence kind of presents in their life, is sort of as a deep thinker. And obviously Sarah Firth is a deep thinker, and she has some really interesting insights, and I feel like the world would be a better place if we listened to our deep thinkers, our philosophers, and really reflected on our own connection to things and our own thoughts about these things. Anyway, I loved this. 5 stars. Highly, highly recommend. Apologies about the boobs. I mean, no apologies about the boobs. I'm just not going to show them to you on the screen. Okay, thank you everybody. That was my month of reading in January. February has gotten off to a bit of a slow start. I'm recording this, what is the date today? The 9th of February. I haven't finished a single book yet, and it's been a bit of a slow reading beginning to the month. It's kind of expected because I went back to work. So traditionally February is a quiet reading month for me, but we'll see what happens. I am still reading, so I will hopefully have finished at least a couple of books to be able to talk to you about at the end of this month. But until then, no, not until then, I'm going to see you in between. I've got a book haul that I am going to film next for the month of January, the stuff that I didn't show in my holiday haul. So this is stuff that I either picked up on the way back or just generally had picked up before and or after returning from my holiday. So yeah, that's basically it. I'll catch you on the next video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you then. Bye.